Well, 50 years of the Assad family dictatorship came to an end yesterday in Syria. President Biden made this statement at 1:39 p.m.
At long last, the Assad regime has fallen. This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country.
President Biden made the point that Assad's support from Russia collapsed under the pressure of the war. Vladimir Putin decided to on social media. Assad is gone. He has fled his country. His protector, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, was not interested in protecting him any longer. Vladimir Putin is reportedly protecting Bashar al-Assad, who is now residing in Moscow, having successfully fled to Moscow yesterday. In Syria, no one is sure what will happen next. Here's Richard Engel in Damascus.
And that has been the kind of scene that we've been seeing all morning here, where people have come to Damascus from all over the country to sing songs, to take photographs of this moment. There was a drone in the air a moment ago trying to get some high shots, and lots of celebratory gunfire. These are civilians. People are coming out. You can hear some women here ululating, which is a very typical way of cheering and celebrating. And there are also fighters here. Some of the rebels have made appearances, and they are being greeted like heroes as people come out, embrace them, thank them for the fight. This has just been a stunning last couple of weeks in this country.
Donald Trump's choice for Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has spoken favorably about Assad in the past, saying, quote, Assad is not the enemy of the United States, end quote. She has admitted to secretly traveling to meet with Assad at a time when all travel in and out of Syria was controlled by Assad. If her nomination makes it all the way to a confirmation hearing, Tulsi Gabbard will be asked about every word she said to Assad and what he said to her. And while she's testifying, the former dictator of Syria will be sitting in Moscow watching her confirmation hearing and knowing if she tells any lies under oath about her communications with him. Assad will, of course, tell his landlord now, Vladimir Putin, that Tulsi Gabbard has compromised herself, and then Vladimir Putin will own her future. We have the possibility of Donald Trump empowering a director of national intelligence who can be blackmailed by deposed dictator Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin. No president other than Donald Trump would ever nominate as unqualified and reckless a person as Tulsi Gabbard for any position in government. So, too, with Donald Trump's nomination of Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, we can only wonder what Pete Hegseth was doing over the weekend when the regime in Syria was collapsing. He has promised to stop drinking only if he is confirmed as Secretary of Defense. That means, according to his former co-workers at Fox, when he was hosting a weekend morning show, it is possible that Pete Hegseth was drunk all weekend this weekend, as he reportedly has been in the past while working at Fox. It is extremely likely that President Biden had private conversations, possibly several this weekend, with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin as the situation was rapidly unfolding in Syria. That's the kind of job Defense Secretary is. The urgent situations and the urgent calls can happen at any moment of the day or night, including the weekends. If Pete Hegseth doesn't have a drinking problem, there is still no reason to think that he could handle any aspect of the job of Defense Secretary at any level of sobriety. Donald Trump apparently believes he can somehow avoid the embarrassment of the possible collapse of Pete Hegseth's nomination by simply making no effort to get him confirmed.
Have you gotten assurances from senators that he's going to be confirmed?
No.
That interview also included these gems from Donald Trump. Quote, I consider myself to be the father of IVF. And I'm sort of proud of my decision. At the same time, sometimes I regret it. And I know more about judges than any human being in history. That interview also included Donald Trump repeatedly telling the lie that the January 6th committee deleted all of the evidence that they collected in their investigation, and that members of the committee should go to jail. Donald Trump then added that he would not tell his attorney general to prosecute Liz Cheney or any other members of the January 6th committee. He also said that he would not tell his attorney general to prosecute Joe Biden, even though Donald Trump made an explicit, in-writing campaign promise to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate Joe Biden. Donald Trump was asked about his nominee for Secretary of Defense being the first presidential nominee in history to promise not to drink if he gets the job.
He'll stop drinking if he gets this job.
Yeah.
Does that worry you?
No, I think that everybody has something that they can stop. Some people can stop eating. I'm lucky I'm not a drinker, but I could stop eating.
If you stop eating, as hunger strikers around the world have proven, you will be dead in a matter of months. If you stop drinking alcohol, you might just live a lot longer. Donald Trump doesn't seem to know the difference between stopping eating and stopping drinking alcohol. And an answer like that would get any previous president condemned as being too old or just too out of it and confused to handle the job of president. But Donald Trump's rank and unyielding stupidity on every subject raised in that interview is something the Washington news media does not seem particularly animated by. In the same way, they have been animated, to put it mildly, every time Joe Biden stutters or stumbles in the middle of a sentence or uses the wrong word, when what Joe Biden is actually saying is both true and important. If Joe Biden said any of the things Donald Trump said in that interview yesterday, the national news media would have declared him utterly lost. As of tonight, Pete Hegseth does not have the votes to win confirmation in the Senate Armed Services Committee. 3 Republican members of that committee have made it clear they are not now voting yes on the Hegseth nomination, and it takes only 1 Republican vote to kill that nomination in the committee. That includes the 2 Republican women on the committee, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa and Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska, and it also includes Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota.
What do you make of Pete Hegseth as President-elect Trump's pick for defense secretary? Have you decided where you are on that?
I had a great meeting with Pete. I told him that I really thought there was a path forward for him to be confirmed. But I think the challenge for Pete is going to be responding in public to some of the allegations that have been made.
Does he have your support?
We'll find out after he comes back and he answers those questions in public.
We'll find out. It only takes 1 Republican senator in the Armed Services Committee to vote against Pete Hegseth to defeat the nomination in the committee. It is still technically possible to bring that nomination to the Senate floor for a vote of the full Senate, but usually a nomination defeated in the committee dies in the committee. Here's what Senator Deb Fischer said about Pete Hegseth's nomination.
Are you ready to say where you're going to fall on that vote quite yet?
You know, we'll see how the hearing goes. But as I said, we had a great conversation.
We'll see how the hearing goes. Everyone knows how the hearing is going to go. Everyone knows the hearing is going to be a disaster. Every Republican senator knows if Pete Hegseth makes it to a Senate confirmation hearing, there will be endless testimony and questioning about his public drunkenness and his drunkenness at work and the extramarital night of sex that he admitted to in a police investigation that happened in a Monterey, California hotel room, which the woman involved told the Monterey police was rape. No accused rapist has ever had a Senate confirmation hearing. Pete Hegseth is now scheduled to have the first Senate confirmation hearing in history of an accused rapist. And every Republican senator who's saying we'll see how the hearing goes knows exactly how the hearing is going to go. And they know that voting against his nomination will be much, much easier. after that hearing. Senator Joni Ernst, who is running for re-election in 2 years, is now being targeted for a possible Republican primary challenge in Iowa if she doesn't support Pete Hegseth. She has now taken to telling reporters, these are her words, quote, "I am supporting him through this process," end quote. She has said that repeatedly now to reporters. And of course, reporters realize that doesn't really tell you how she's going to vote.
Absolutely. It means that we're having really good discussions, and we discussed several items that were really important to me, and I'll just refer back to my statement on those items. But what I appreciated very much about Mr. Hegseth, he came in, he really does respect the process, and I'm grateful for that. But again, I'll refer you back to my statement.
Are you confident because you denied about those assault allegations? Do you believe those denials?
I'll refer you back to this statement.
Will you have another meeting with him?
That's to be determined, but thank you.
You talked about audit in your statement. What does that mean? Can you provide more details?
Yes, and we talked through a number of issues that the Pentagon has right now, and it was a very thoughtful and deep conversation about several items that I'd already talked to him about, and it was good to have a real thorough policy discussion.
Did the pressure of getting back home and primary politics play into this?
We have been talking these same issues every meeting that we've had, and he had really thoughtful answers. So thank you. Thanks, guys.
No matter how many times they asked, she repeatedly refused to say that she's going to vote for Pete Hegseth's nomination. Leading off our discussion tonight is Congressman Adam Smith of Washington. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Thank you very much for joining us. So the House committee has exactly the same jurisdiction as the Senate Armed Services Committee, except they do the confirmation process. But whoever is the next defense secretary is going to have to come to your committee, is going to need credibility with your committee, presumably in many different situations. Can you imagine a Secretary Hegseth, on the state of the evidence we know now, actually testifying to your committee about any matters?
Well, not with any credibility.
Yeah.
I think that's a key point. Now, there's also the matter of, does he have experience at the Pentagon or even running an organization similarly? Can he handle that level of bureaucracy, just the day in and day out of running it? But his credibility right now is nowhere. I mean, you've mentioned some of the drinking, the sexual assault allegations, but he was actually, in a prominent position in two separate veterans organizations that he ran both of them into the ground, and that's where a ton of the allegations come from people who worked with him. I forget the name of the second organization, the one funded by the Koch brothers that he ran. That's where all the allegations of drinking, spending the money on parties, womanizing, and just running the organization in the most horrible manner possible. And he's not going to have the credibility because, as you've mentioned, we deal with some pretty serious issues. And he does not seem to be up to that job.
In the reporting, it was a woman working at one of those veterans organizations, small group of maybe 10 employees, who had to pull him away from getting on the stage in a strip club. She managed to save him from being the nominee who actually was on the stage at a strip club to now just the one who was pulled off by one of his coworkers. That same woman says on the same night, another one of the coworkers, the men in the organization, then tried to rape her. That's the organization he was running. That would be days of Senate confirmation questions in any previous situation.
Yeah, well, and that's really the I guess, interesting, troubling, traumatic aspect of this is, look, Donald Trump has built his career on, I can say whatever I want, and you're not really hearing it. And we'll do whatever we want, and we'll decide what the truth is after the fact. And I think he's going to test that theory. I don't share the confidence of a lot of people that Pete Hegseth is necessarily not going to get the votes, because they are going to put the pressure on Joni Ernst, on Deb Fischer, and everything. Once this isn't about anything. That's all just made up stuff. Don't believe any of that. Are you with me or aren't you? Donald Trump's going to push that. I guess the thought I had is, if he can make RFK Jr. eat a Big Mac, can he make Senate Republicans vote for an obviously unqualified candidate who lacks the credibility to do the job? I don't know that I would bet the mortgage against that.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about the timing. It's the confirmation hearing is not until some point in January. We're not sure when. His probably will be one of the later ones, but it gives them more time in Iowa to build primary challenges against Joni Ernst and to make her take that into consideration.
I mean, that's been the fundamental feature of Donald Trump's rise in the Republican Party. It goes all the way back to Mark Sanford. Mark Sanford said a few critical things about Donald Trump back in 2017. It wasn't even nothing compared to what's now. They primaried him and they beat him. And that message was received by Republicans.
As we go forward with this, in addition to, there's going to be so much attention on the sexual allegations, the rape allegations involving Pete Hegseth, the drunkenness both at work and publicly in strip clubs and all of that stuff, the mismanagement. What about the actual job of Secretary of Defense? What are the kinds of questions that a nominee of his minimal experience should face about the actual job?
Well, there's two big aspects of that. One is you're running a $900 billion organization with several million employees, the world's largest bureaucracy. What do you know about doing that? How are you going to deal with that bureaucracy? You make a decision. How are you going to make sure it goes forward? What are your ideas for reforming the Department of Defense? You know, Mike Rogers, who's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and I are very focused on getting the Pentagon to innovate more quickly, to become a more efficient, more rapidly moving organization. What does he know about that? But also, what are his policies? You know, he's written a couple of books, and his basic policy seems to be only men need to be involved in the military. All right, so we're going to get rid of women. We're going to get rid of anyone in the LGBTQ community. How's that going to work in terms of recruitment? Women serve in the military very effectively. And if you read what he has to say about it, he seems to think that all we need in the military, his word, are dudes. So how are you going to work with people who aren't, your mirror image straight white guy? Because you do have to figure out how to work with people who are different from you to run an organization of that size. My gosh, once we get past the drunkenness and the sexual assault allegations, there are pretty serious policy questions that also need to be asked.
We're going to try to squeeze in a quick commercial. We will squeeze in a quick commercial break right here so we can continue this conversation. I want to cover more about Syria when we come back. We'll be right back with Congressman Adam Smith after this break. Donald Trump issued a written statement about the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, saying the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved! ! Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this.
The United States has clear and enduring interests in Syria. We have a strong interest in preventing the reemergence of ISIS, given the death and destruction that it's wrought for so long. We have a clear interest in ensuring that whatever weapons of mass destruction or components are left in Syria do not fall into the wrong hands. We have a clear interest in doing what we can to avoid the fragmentation of Syria, mass migrations from Syria, and, of course, the export of terrorism and extremism. The region and the world have a responsibility to support the Syrian people as they begin to rebuild their country and chart a new direction. The United States should be committed to supporting them as they do that.
Back with us, Congressman Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. So Secretary Blinken laid out some rather significant stakes in this situation.
Yes, no, absolutely. And look, I think what President-elect Trump is probably focusing on is we shouldn't be militarily involved. And to some extent, he's right. Now, I will point out, we have some troops in eastern Syria because of ISIS. And there are tens of thousands of ISIS prisoners in camps there that we want to make sure don't escape. So there is that tiny little military piece. But fundamentally, it is correct to say the U.S. military shouldn't be showing up trying to fix this problem. But we absolutely have an interest in being involved in Syria. It is an incredible opportunity. For too long, governments in the Middle East have been led by religious extremism or hatred of one group or another. There is an opportunity for Syria to actually focus on governing its citizens well, and we ought to help them in that. We ought to find ways to work with them, whether it's humanitarian assistance, whether it's working with people in the region, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, convincing them to help. If we build a solid government in Syria, that could be a major blow to Iran's efforts to continually destabilize the region. So we should not simply ignore what's going on in Syria.
It sounds like what you're hoping for does require very solid intelligence about exactly what's going on, possibly a physical presence there at some level to be able to report back. Here are the different factions. Here are the ones who are sympathetic to the way we think.
Certainly at a diplomatic level. I mean, and we've seen this play out in a whole bunch of different places, frequently not well, by the way.
Right.
When a government falls.
There's that exhilarating moment of seeing the horrible dictator knocked out, and then what happens?
Well, who's going to take over, and who are these people? Now, this seems like a better organized rebel movement that made an effort to be inclusive. Now, where the leadership came from initially was an offshoot of ISIS, and that is worth worrying about. But he seems to have changed and brought in other people, but we don't know. So we need diplomats, we need intel, we need to know what's going on to try to help Syria get to a path that doesn't have it supporting ISIS, and hopefully, like I said, has it governing Syria well, and that could bleed over into Lebanon, which, as you know, has been a disaster for some time. And we could really have a more peaceful, stable region if the Syrian rebels get this right.
This sounds like, historically, the stuff of a special envoy. This seems like a situation where a president would, in addition to the ambassadorial corps that's already present in the Middle East, say, I'm choosing some highly experienced person to try to get in there to get real contact with the new elements who have emerged in Syria.
Right, and absolutely. And the roles that the countries around Syria are going to play, Turkey, which I haven't mentioned yet, it's going to be crucial. Turkey has interests in Syria because they are concerned about the Kurds, the PKK, and how we work with Turkey to make sure that they don't disrupt what's going on there, make them a positive player instead of a negative player. It's a real complicated diplomatic picture, and yes, the experience of the U.S. and our intel background could be enormously helpful.
It would be good to have highly experienced members of the cabinet, for example, at a time like that.
It would. Right, and not just people who promise not to drink anymore.
Yeah, promising not to drink. Representative Adam Smith, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Donald Trump said yesterday he wants all of the members of the January 6th committee to go to jail. There is no chance of that, of course, because unlike Donald Trump, none of them have committed any crimes. That's next with Andrew Weissman. Presidents prior to Donald Trump have always scrupulously avoided any comment about pending criminal cases or possible criminal defendants, which is why President Richard Nixon had to quickly issue a corrective press statement in 1970 when he let it slip publicly that he thought Charles Manson was guilty of the multiple murders that Manson was eventually found guilty of in court. A president commenting on the guilt of a defendant like Manson could have created a mistrial, and so Nixon immediately corrected that slip, and no president has ever come close to such a slip again until Donald Trump constantly talked about people who should be convicted of crimes, even if they committed no crimes. And he was at it again yesterday.
Now, listen, this was a committee, a big deal. They lied. And what did they do? They deleted and destroyed a whole year and a half worth of testimony. Do you know that I can't get... I think those people committed a major crime.
Sir.
And Cheney was behind it.
Well,
and so was Benny Thompson and everybody on that committee.
We're going to...
For what they did,
Yeah.
honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think
I think
should
everybody
go to
on
jail.
anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
When you say that,
on
it carries
strengthening the
weight, though. You know, you've tapped these people to lead the Justice Department and FBI.
They can do whatever they want.
Liz Cheney responded with this statement. President-elect Trump again lied about the January 6th Select Committee and said members of the committee should go to jail for carrying out our constitutional responsibilities. Here is the truth. Donald Trump attempted to overturn the 2020 presidential election and seize power. He mobilized an angry mob and sent them to the United States Capitol, where they attacked police officers, invaded the building, and halted the official counting of electoral votes. Trump watched on television as police officers were brutally beaten and the Capitol was assaulted, refusing for hours to tell the mob to leave. This was the worst breach of our Constitution by any president in our nation's history. Donald Trump's suggestion that members of Congress who later investigated his illegal and unconstitutional actions should be jailed is a continuation of his assault on the rule of law and the foundations of our republic. Donald Trump knows his claims about the Select Committee are ridiculous and false, as has been detailed extensively, including by Chairman Thompson in his July 2023 letter. There is no conceivably appropriate factual or constitutional basis for what Donald Trump is suggesting. A Justice Department investigation of the work of a congressional committee, and any lawyer who attempts to pursue that course would quickly find themselves engaged in sanctionable conduct. What the public now deserves to see is the evidence and grand jury material assembled by the special counsel Smith, including the grand jury testimony of Vice President Pence and members of Donald Trump's former White House and campaign staff. The Justice Department should ensure that all that material is preserved and cannot be destroyed. As much of that information as possible should be disclosed in the special counsel's upcoming report. Ultimately, Congress should require that all that material be publicly released so all Americans can see Donald Trump for who he genuinely is and fully understand his role in this terrible period in our nation's history. Joining our discussion now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and MSNBC legal analyst. Andrew, so many things to cover here. First of all, the January 6th committee destroyed nothing. So Donald Trump's premise about why they should be prosecuted and sent to jail, actually, he doesn't even say they should be prosecuted. He skips that part and says, just put them in jail. There's absolutely no crime here. And when pushed, Donald Trump says he will not order his attorney general to begin an investigation. But what do you make of both what Donald Trump said and Liz Cheney's response?
So first, I do think that the way to cover this when Donald Trump made these sort of flat-out assertions, and at least here, he doesn't just say they committed a crime. He actually at least says something factual, according to him, about they purportedly destroyed evidence. The follow-up needs to be, and what is the proof of that? What is the proof that there's in any facts that you have that that's the case? I should note that's exactly the same thing that was said about the Mueller team, of which I was one of the members, that we somehow were destroying evidence. And the thing is, when you're an investigator, that is the last thing you are doing. You are concerned about making sure it's all preserved. So here, I want to turn to what Liz Cheney said about making sure that this evidence is preserved. And one of the things that Jack Smith can do to make sure it's preserved is borrow a page from what we did and make sure that you submit as much as you can to the court. And here, the report and the information that's grand jury or arguably grand jury and how you're dealing with it can be given to Jeb Boasberg, who is the chief judge of the D.C. District Court. Why to give it to court? Because the executive branch is not in charge of that. And so that is a place that you can put documents, you can submit it, as long as you have a valid good faith basis to the court. And that is a way to make sure it is not destroyed. Just note what Liz Cheney is saying is I'm concerned about making sure this evidence stays intact and is there for history. And it's the exact opposite of what Donald Trump is saying in terms of there being destruction of evidence.
Yeah, so let's get to destruction of evidence. The afternoon of January 20th, any evidence that is still in the possession of the Justice Department, Donald Trump could presumably just order destroyed over there.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated.
I hope it is.
Yeah, and the reason is that for any criminal case that is over, the argument is that you can do it because it's not taking evidence from either an ongoing criminal case or some ongoing investigation. But that's one possibility for why you might have to preserve something. In other words, it's relevant and you've been subpoenaed for it in connection with a criminal case. But remember, there are a slew of civil cases pending in D.C., 8 of them. And I think 7 of the 8 directly involve what happened on January 6th. The 8th is related to it. So destroying documents that are called for and relevant to that case does pose the problem of criminal sanctions. Now, Donald Trump himself may not be that worried about it because of the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision, but everyone below him who would have to take steps to destroy evidence has taken an oath to the Constitution, and 2 has a bar ticket that would be in jeopardy if they were to take such action. So there really are still guardrails if somebody was trying to get rid of that evidence. And finally, as I said, if that evidence is in the hands of the court, that is not something that the executive branch can unilaterally get access to and destroy.